Good afternoon, everyone. This is Mrs. Carter. I'm going to take the first part of the Nigeria notes. So just follow along. I like to ask questions, but obviously now I can't ask them but to myself. And I want to remind you guys that there is a YouTube lesson every day at 4 o'clock. All you have to do is search advanced placement and then click on comparative, and all of the videos will show up. And they do go live at 4 o'clock Monday through Friday. So make sure that you're checking those out too. So we're going to start with Nigeria. Nigeria is located in Africa. It is the most populous country that is in Africa, as you guys read. Notice it does have access to the sea, so it is not landlocked. So they do get a lot of shipping to and from the southern part of Nigeria. The official name is Federal Republic of Nigeria. You can probably guess. Yes, they are federal. The capital city is Abuja, which is located in the center of Nigeria. It used to be Lagos, which is on one of the ports in Nigeria, but because of the different cleavages that you guys know are located in Nigeria, they moved the capital to the middle. They discovered oil in Nigeria in the late 1950s. So as you can tell, that's going to be one of the things that makes them the most money. It is the most populous country in Africa, 194 million people. And I was just reading that it looks like they may surpass the United States in population soon. So they could be the third most populous in the world in about 20 years. So as you read, there are many, many ethnic groups that live in Nigeria. The three that we're going to concentrate on the most are located on this slide. The Hausa Fulani, they dominate the Northwest. They are 29% of the population, and they are mostly Muslim. Therefore, they have advocated for Sharia law in the northern part of Nigeria, and they do have Sharia law, which is obviously going to be different from what's in the southern part of Nigeria. You have two other ethnic groups that you have in the south, the Yoruba, and then the Igbo or Igbo. Sometimes you'll see it without the G. I'm not really sure the difference there. Yoruba is kind of a mix between different religions. So you have some that are Muslim, some that are Christian, and some that are native religions that have just been kept over from the different tribes that live there in Nigeria. And the Igbo are mostly Christian, and they are in the southern part as well. So if you take a look at this map, you can see the different areas that those three dominate. And you can also see many of the other different ethnic groups that are in Nigeria. So the sometimes, you know, in the past they've had that EWA group, that IJAW, that 10% and that yellow. Sometimes you've seen that on the AP exam, mostly dealing with the Niger Delta, because of course that's how they ship the oil to and from and out of Nigeria, and a lot of rebel groups are made up of that group, the EWA. So I just wanted to point that out. Some other different influences in Nigeria. The Northeast is home to other Muslim groups, which we just looked at on the map. In the middle belt, you'll have a mixture of the smaller ethnic groups, and it's kind of where the Muslim and Christians line is. There is a lot of fighting that goes on in that middle belt because of those groups that are different religions and different ethnic groups. So, that's going to be one of our countries that have coinciding cleavages, because in the North, they're different ethnic groups, they're different religions than the South. So nothing really is in common. So there's no cross cutting. In the Southern zone, you'll find some other minority groups like we saw on the map, and then mostly, of course, Christian. So if we look at this map in the green, you'll see those areas do follow Sharia law. So you guys know that that's like the law that's based on the Quran. And some parts follow it a little more strictly than others, especially in that northwest corner where we have a group called Boko Haram that actually has some control over some of those areas, and the government keeps trying to stop them from having control there. So in the southern part there, the yellow, you can see that they follow mostly code law. So that can bring about some major conflicts, because something that is against the law in the northern part isn't necessarily against the law in the southern part. So that does lead to some problems there. And notice that the capital Abuja, right there in the middle of Nigeria. And in Jos, there's been a lot of fighting, especially in the early 2000s, between the different religious groups that are located there. So some struggles that Nigeria has had in their past, you guys read about in section 1 with the authoritarian governments that happened after they got their independence in 1960. So they started off being democratic, then the military took over. So then they set up an authoritarian government, and then it went back and forth. They had a period of time of 3 different military takeovers. They also struggle economically with some areas that are more developed than others. In the southern part of Nigeria, tends to be where you'll find a little bit more developed, because they do have access to the sea and the shipping. And then in the north, most of the economic activity is either through herding or subsistence farming, which is farming for yourself and your family. So there's not the southern part, again, is more economically developed, which is another cleavage. Another problem that people in Nigeria experience is corruption. Their government, because they make so much money from the oil, especially when the oil prices are up, the government officials tend to take that for themselves. They create more government jobs, and the people that live around those areas where the oil are not receiving better roads, better bridges, better schools. And so that has led to some major problems there. And that goes kind of along with that oil-rich oligarchs versus ordinary Nigerians. And then what role religion should play in politics, especially with, some of the places in Nigeria following Sharia law. And then you have the group Boko Haram that wants to break apart and form its own Muslim state. So for many years, we've always wondered, should Nigeria remain one nation? Because when you go and you talk to people from Nigeria, you're not going to hear people say, wow, I'm just proud to be Nigerian, unless it's in soccer, which was in one of the videos that you should have watched. So the whole point of the borders were just what the Europeans created when they took over in the 1800s. So typically, a lot of these different ethnic groups do not get along, do not, peacefully get along. So that has created some problems. So along with that question, should Nigeria remain one nation, that's what we call the national question. How, if we are going to remain a nation state, how are we going to distribute power? Who's going to get the most? Are we going to be federal? Are we going to be unitary, presidential? Are we going to set up a parliamentary system? So there have been differing debates on how to distribute that power, because you have all these different cleavages. And a lot of the leaders and the citizens, when they first got their independence, there was a lot of struggle to see who was going to remain powerful and what kind of system of government would they set up. So the British took over Nigeria in the 1800s. So people in Nigeria, for the most part, do speak English and do understand English. The borders were set up, of course, to reflect the British influence. So when they set up the borders, they didn't, think about the different groups, different ethnicities, the different languages that were located there. They just did it for the British, for their benefit. So the British often will encourage these divisions so that it would keep the Nigerians from uniting against the British to kick them out. So they would force them together and even sometimes encourage those different divisions between those groups. The British would use this type of rule called indirect rule. So they would allow traditional leaders to stay in power, but of course they had to be subordinate to a British governor, and there were, incentives for them to follow what the British wanted. And if things didn't go the British way, then of course they would crack down on the groups that would try to resist. So that's going to create this type of authoritarian political culture that, the Nigerians have lived with until 1960 when they got their independence, and then we see the military taking over. So same thing as they've been used to that authoritarian culture, and then when the military comes in and says, oh, we can make things better, yes, they're willing to give that legitimacy to the military. So in 1960 they won their independence. It was not much bloodshed, a lot of different civil society groups that come together in 1957, 58 to ask the British, for their independence. And this was a time period when many African countries were getting their independence from European countries. So now that they have their independence, how are they going to set up a government? So because the British had ruled them, they thought, well, let's try this parliamentary system and see how that works. So as you guys remember from the UK, the parliamentary system, you have to have at least a majority to get things done. Well, when you have 250 ethnic groups and you have different religions, that was not really successful for Nigeria. So this experiment with parliamentary system did not really work for them. So that's when, of course, we had our first military takeover. Then after they had their second republic, then you'll see them move to a presidential type of system. But with all these different ethnicities, many fights are going to break out between the parliament. The military is going to come and take over. It's a series of 3 military takeovers, and then they also tried to experience between those 3 republics, which were experiments with democracy. So from 1966 to 1999, they had those series of violent coups, assassinations, alternating with 2 brief periods of, democracy. And even during that time period in 1966, we have a civil war. The Biafran Civil War lasted a couple years, but eventually the military will again take over. Finally, in 1999, we have the Fourth Republic, which is what they currently have. They've had a series of dictators that you might have heard the names before. So Obasanjo was a dictator, but yet became the first elected president of the Fourth Republic. Buhari, who is the current president, was also one of their military leaders. And a couple of other ones that you might have heard of. In 1993 was Abacha, and he stole so much money from the Nigerian people and the government, and he would hide it in different European bank accounts. So very, very corrupt governments back and forth. So finally, in 1999, we set up the Fourth Republic, and it will be based on a presidential system. Couple of things to review with the political cleavages. I went over them, but as you can see, they're going to be all coinciding. So ethnicity, we've already talked about them. They don't have, the three major ethnic groups do not have much in common. They speak different languages, but for the most part, they all understand English, and some of them even speak English. We've already talked about their religion. You have Islam in the north, with Sharia law, Christianity in the south, and you also have some native, what they call animist religions that still believe in some ancestor worship in the south. The region, the north and south, as we just talked about, follow along those ethnic lines. It's kind of interesting because as far as economically, it's opposite of Mexico. So in Mexico, in the north, you have, more economically developed, whereas in Nigeria, it's going to be the southern part. You also have your urban rural areas. Most of your urban cities are going to be in the south. That's where a lot of the political organization takes place. Your voluntary civil society and protest is going to take place in major cities in the South. We talked about the social class movements, or excuse me, the social class with the higher economic and lower economic development. And oil is located in the South, and they are rentier state for the most part. They have multinational corporations that come in and extract the oil, and then they pay their rents to the government. Their government also has their own oil corporation, but most of this, of course, is located in the South, and the South feels like because most of the resources are there, they should benefit and should receive most of the money off of that. Unfortunately, the government has been taking a lot of that money, and they're very corrupt with that. Because of these different cleavages, we have seen some separatist movements emerge in the past 20 years. A group called Boko Haram is in the north. They want a Muslim state. They've been affiliated with ISIS. They've been known to bomb many places in the northern part of Nigeria. They also have kidnapped girls. In 2014, there was a big campaign called Bring Back Our Girls, because 200 girls were stolen from a school. So we'll talk more about Boko Haram, and you'll read a little bit more. There's also been some separatist movements in the South. You had the Biafran Civil War, and you also will have some different groups that are located along the Niger Delta that feel like that they are not receiving any of the funding from the oil, etc. A group called MEND, and another group that has just come about called the Niger Delta Avengers that you guys will read an article about. So this pretty much takes care of the history, the different cleavages, a little bit of background geography on Nigeria. This should have covered all of section 1. So if you have any questions, make sure that you email Mrs. McCarthy or myself so that we can help you. And we will also be meeting this week and talk about some of the articles that you read. So feel free to always reach out. And hopefully I can answer your questions, and we'll be getting ready for the AP exam. Talk to you soon.